start rolling, and today is the 23rd? No, 25th.
25th.
25th. Today's the 25th of March.
Yes, it is.
2018, and we're at the house of Dorothy Gerson.
I'm sorry.
Last name.
Gerson. He
Gerson.
asked your last name.
Gerson.
Gerson.
Okay. And
My husband's name, well, I was dating him, is Bud.
I need you to look at me though, not at Carrie.
Was Bud.
Okay.
So I thought, well, I asked him somewhere along the line, what's your whole name? Byron Hayden Gerson.
Okay. And your maiden name and your date of birth?
I'm not telling my date of birth anymore.
Well, you don't have to. I'm not going to force you, but.
Well, I will tell you why I don't. I've always told my birth all my life, but I'm well into my 90s, and when I was 91, it was okay. When it was 92, it was okay. At a lunch, and when I was 93, I was sitting there talking, and two people said, I started to get up, and two people pounced on me. So we have to help you. I don't need them.
Okay.
Then when it was time for me to go to my car, one of them grabbed me and said, I will not let you walk to your car alone. So that is why I'm not telling my name.
You don't have, just tell me your astrological sign.
My what?
Astrological sign.
I forget.
Okay, then forget.
I forget.
What is your maiden name? Where are you born?
I was born in Detroit. My maiden name was Dorothy Mary Davidson.
Where in Detroit?
I think in children's, not Hutzel, what would be Hutzel Hospital now, or either that or at home, I'm not sure.
Okay. Are you the eldest?
I'm the oldest grandchild in the Wetzman side of the family, which was my grandparents' name, Joseph and Betsy Wetzman. And I think they were the most unusual people I ever met.
Your mother's side or your father's
It's
side?
This will be all my mother's side.
This is on your mother's side?
Yeah, because that's Wetzman, Davidson, Gerson, and all of that.
Okay, so we're gonna walk through that very carefully. Remember that I don't know anything. So
okay.
This is our conversation.
Fine.
You might say things to me that are very clear to you, but I have no idea. So we need to make that clear.
Right.
So you're born in Detroit. In what neighborhood do you grow up in?
I grew up in Detroit, Northwest Detroit. My grandparents already lived there. They lived at 90 Virginia Park.
Okay.
That's just above the boulevard, and out past them were their not real streets yet.
Right.
They were very early in that area because apparently my grandfather had looked at some houses, but my grandmother didn't think they were nice enough. So
Yeah.
at some point they bought a beautiful house, 1 block from Woodward, on Virginia Park.
On Virginia Park.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of?
Which is a street, oddly, it's an old street.
Yeah.
The street to this day is paved with brick.
It's cobblestone?
Yep.
What kind of, so you're the eldest?
Yes.
And after you, who comes?
My brother.
Your brother, so you're two children.
Well, my brother was born 18 months after I was, so I never knew any life that he wasn't there.
Gotcha. 18 months separated.
And oddly, I was sort of a strong child, and my brother was not so, he wasn't that big. Well, he was, of course, smaller than me. So my job was to take care of him.
Okay.
And we were very close. I just don't ever remember anything where he wasn't there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And your parents?
my parents,
Introduce me to them.
pardon?
Introduce me to them.
My parents were both incredibly strong personalities. My father ran a very tough business. It was a wholesale grocery. And he had to leave early in the mornings and this and that. And you know, that was this great big enormous warehouse where all the grocers would come to get their, that's how they did groceries way back then. And my mother was always in some kind of organization and going to a lot of meetings. And
What kind of organizations?
well, they were founders of Hadassah and so forth. And what happened was
Hadassah, well, are you talking like
in Detroit.
In Detroit.
Yeah, right, of the chapter and all that. Well, it seems that Henrietta Zold came here and certainly got things started.
Sure.
And she stayed with my grandparents. They had this, I love that house, a great big house on Virginia Park near Woodward. My grandmother was a big...
I want to get to your grandparents, but I want to just talk about your parents
Yeah.
right now. Were your parents born here?
Yes.
They were born in the United States.
Oh, yeah. My mother was born in Iowa, and my father was born in Upper Michigan, I think.
Linwood?
It was Hillman, Michigan, where Dad was.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they were...
And they both, at one point, somebody asked my mother to do a thing about her parents and this and that. And so, how they went to Iowa, all of that. So she called me and she said, I want you to come over and, you know, you could talk too. So I went over and I heard my mother giving her thing about, oh, I know, it was the Davidsons. It was the other grandparents, that they were doing some kind of I don't know, writing a book or this or that about the counties in Upper Michigan, something. And they were in something called Montmorency County, which is going to be in this book. And they lived in a little town called Hillman, Michigan, which was 2 blocks long. And that was what my mother was supposed to be telling them. But she was telling them an identical story about the Wetzmans. She got mixed up. And it was the same thing. These are people, both came at the same time, well before the turn of the century. Sure. I think, well, my mother was the second child, and she was born in 1890, so.
And she was born in the United States.
Oh, yeah.
And your mother's maiden name?
Sarah Wetzman.
And your father's?
Ralph Davidson.
Ralph Davidson. We're going to talk about your father in a sec, but so your mother's born in Iowa?
Right. Right.
Okay. And
my grandparents,
yeah, from your mother's side,
on my mother's side now, came from Russia. Mm-hmm. And the story is that the great-grandfather, they only had 3 children. They had 2 sons and a daughter. The daughter was supposed to have been a doctor, but how could that be in Russia? I don't know. Anyway, but that's the story. And my grandfather, Joseph, was a younger brother, but very aggressive and very a big personality. So the grandfather sent him. Well, first he was married to my grandmother, and they came to America.
Together.
Yeah, together. And I always asked my grandmother about how it was when she came. What was it like in this place and everything? And she said it, you know, it was nothing to talk about. She didn't particularly want to talk about it, but she did say, which I always remember, it was, they asked you a lot of questions about yourself and this and that, and you had to have a sponsor, and you had to show that you had a sponsor. You had to show some money. It didn't care what kind, but show that you had some money. And something, oh, I know, and the other thing she said is, if a child sneezed, they sent the whole family back. They did not take. That was her take on what was going on when you came in. That no, they weren't looking for sick people. Anyway, these grandparents had a name to somebody. They knew nothing about America, but they had this name that was in Iowa. So however they did it, with no language, nothing.
They ended up in Iowa.
They got right to Iowa, did not find the person, did not stop them at all. I think my grandfather peddled for a small amount of time. And then we have a picture of beautiful store in this town. That was their store. They had a store.
What was the name of the town? Do you know?
Well, that town was, the store came later. The first child was born was an uncle who was born in Muscatine, Iowa. The second child born was my mother. She was born in something called Watcher, which was spelled WHATCHEER exclamation point. That was the name of the town, which is Indian talk. And the third child, which was my aunt, Fanny, was born in Oskaloosa. So they moved.
They moved around a lot.
Obviously looking for the bigger or better places. They were.
And where did they finally settle in Iowa?
They settled in Oskaloosa, Iowa, where the rest of the family was born and where they lived for many years.
And your grandfather had a shop there, is that correct?
They had a store, in Oskaloosa.
Okay.
And
your mother is the middle child?
My mother is the second child.
And her name? First name?
Sarah Davidson.
Sarah.
Oh, no, Sarah Wetzman.
Right. Weitzman?
No, not Wetzman. Wetsman.
Okay. Wetzman.
Wetzman. Yeah.
Now, I'd like to shift a little and go to your father's side.
Right.
Okay, where is your father's full name?
Ralph Davidson.
Ralph Davidson. Where is Ralph born?
There's always a question, but I think he was born in Hillman. I mean, he was...
Hillman, Michigan.
Hillman, Michigan.
Michigan?
Which was near Alpena, in the tiniest little town.
He was born...
And he was the oldest child and born, and the rest of them came along in Hillman.
Where did his parents come from?
They also came from Russia.
Also from Russia.
Yeah, right.
Okay. This is the mass immigration of the 1880s. The 1880s,
yeah, it is. It was
1880s,
even.
1880s, 1890s.
It was well before that, because my mother was born in 1890, the second child. It was maybe 1880.
It's a wave of pogroms in Russia.
Yeah.
That it's the big first Jewish wave of hundreds of thousands, mostly to the United States, and a lot to South Africa. A lot of the Lithuanian Jews, they didn't come to the States. They actually went to South Africa. Yeah. Which is an interesting thing for itself. But anyways.
My grandfather came from a place called Krasilov. I mean, that's...
From your father's side?
On my mother's side.
Your mother's side.
That grandfather.
But the Davidson family is also from Russia.
Yeah, Russia.
Your father is born in America.
I think he was.
Yeah, okay. And he grows up in this small little town called
Hillman.
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 Hillman, Michigan.
Right near Alpena.
How do your parents, how do they meet? She's from Iowa, he's from Michigan.
Both of them did the same thing. They both moved to different places than where they originally were.
Right.
And the reason my grandparents, Wetzman, moved was very simple. Their children, every day, went from school to the church to play with their friends.
Right.
So my grandfather figured they'll definitely marry out of the faith.
Right.
So he heard that Detroit was a very nice, had a nice Jewish, small place to go, and that's where they came here. Just to,
So they actually left Iowa to come here
yeah,
so that their children will
would not, that's exactly right.
end up Presbyterian, oh my God, Methodist or something like this.
Well, they were at the churches.
Yeah.
They were with their friends.
Yeah,
I
no,
mean,
of course,
you know.
It's normal.
So
Yeah.
that was
They
why.
and so your mother's family moves to Detroit
Yeah.
when your mother is how old, roughly? 10,
In
12,
their teens, I'd
their
say.
teens. So they
Yeah.
move here. They move to Detroit.
Yeah.
Big city,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is basically where your mother. That's how your mother meets your father. They meet
Right.
here in Detroit.
Yeah. Now both of my grandparents were very active and charismatic. I mean, the Wetzman one was president, and the Davidson one was on the board all the time. So they knew each other. The families knew each other. It wasn't a huge. When they came here, it wasn't enormous.
The grandparents that you showed me the portraits of in the
Yeah.
hallway, is that
Wetzmans.
That's
Joseph Wetzman and Bessie Wetzman.
What can you tell me about them and about their connection? Excuse me, to the Zionist movement and to, at the time, the land Palestine and.
Yeah. My grandfather spent a lot of time with his daughters. I mean, everyone lived close together and this and that. And I was along. Because I was the oldest grandchild, the only girl, I was always listening to everything. So I could hear my grandfather, and I still remember, and he said it so many times. The Jewish people have to have a homeland. I mean, I don't know what he was talking about, but that rings in my ears. I can absolutely hear him. He talked about that a lot. So he knew other people who felt that way. Now, most of the Jews, the German Jews in Detroit, were horrified. They didn't want to hear about any Palestinians or anything like that. But this group, which founded Jarcetic and so forth, were very sure there had to be a homeland, and it had to be Palestine and this and that. So when the time came, my grandfather, I don't know how he did it, but by this time they were pretty comfortable and were traveling anyway. He went to Basel, Switzerland for the second Jewish.
This is 1902 or?
Something like that. Right. So, I mean, he wasn't fooling about his Zionism. He wanted.
He put
yeah, right. And so in 1948, he was no longer here. But I was just the happiest when I think about that that he had that prescience, or that looking forwardness.
What business did he come from? Did he establish?
He was in the real estate. He was always in real estate.
In Detroit.
Here,
in Iowa.
and even in Iowa. Yeah, that's how the store. But he had real estate. Mm-hmm. He also had theaters.
Theaters.
He owned theaters. Yeah.
Theaters in Detroit.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So he was a quite well-off guy, influential.
Very well
Decided
off,
to go
I
to
would
the
say.
Second Zionist Congress in Basel.
Yeah.
Is there any knowledge or anything that you know about this Congress or about him being
I don't
there?
know anything about it,
Okay.
no.
You just know that he was
And
there.
I've never heard how he got there, because it must have taken him months to get there.
I'm sure they had.
You know, they didn't have planes, they didn't have anything.
They had a
And they didn't have a lot of trains either.
in Europe more than here. That's for sure.
Maybe better in, yeah.
Yeah, but Basel is in the middle of Europe. It's not on a coast. It's not like Marseille
No.
or Hamburg. It's inland. You got to get to Europe, and then you got to get from whatever port, probably Genoa or probably something in Marseille.
It takes a while.
It takes time. So
Right.
there's not a lot that we know about his participants in that specific Congress. You guys just know that he was
No,
there.
I just know he went.
Okay. Yeah.
That he was.
Probably went with a delegation from North America, I'm sure.
Pardon?
I'm sure that he went with a delegation from North America.
That
No
I have
idea.
no idea.
Okay.
I just know he was there.
He was there.
And he followed his ideas.
Ideas. Is there anything more that you know about his activity with
the Zionism?
Yeah.
Well, no, I don't
Okay.
know anything about that.
What about the land that they bought in Palestine?
Well, that's a whole time later.
And is it the same side of the family?
The same side of the family.
Weizmann?
The Wetzmans,
What?
yeah.
So, what-
My grandfather went with
I just need you to look at me. But
his.
it's good that you ask questions. But
Yeah, right.
No, it's good,
He,
it's good.
he had.
that?
My grandfather had a sort of partner in business, in the real estate business, although that partner never was in the theaters. That was named Zeman, Mr. Zeman. And I don't know, why am I asking about?
Because about the real estate.
Oh, yeah, because
it's no secret.
no, they were
that
buying
Hadassah-
property,
Right.
this and that, right, exactly. And that was one of his partners. And then there was another one, D.W. Simons, who was pretty well known, and he too. And they were very close to my grandparents.
So okay, and your grandmother also, she felt she had these. She belonged to Hadassah.
Well, there was no Hadassah.
No, not the
They were
the group.
starting Hadassah
Henrietta Sold.
in here, yeah. But the reason it was so starting because, I can't just forget her name.
It's okay.
This
Henrietta
is
Sold?
my latest thing. I can't say name.
Happens to me.
Henrietta Zoll.
Henrietta Sold. Henrietta
Decided to
Henrietta
do-
Sold is buried on the Mount of Olives.
Yes, and Henrietta
Actually, I
Zoll.
was at her grave maybe about 2 years ago, because I was doing a short documentary about the caretaker of the.
Yeah, right.
He's an Arab.
Right.
He's 97 years old, and his father was the caretaker of the. And Henrietta Zold asked him as a child to always make sure that there's rosemary. It's not a branch; it's kind of a weed.
Yeah.
Very green, and it's
Yeah.
till today.
You mean on her grave?
Yeah. Like on the side.
That's very nice. Well, she was a teacher in Wisconsin
Yeah.
somewhere,
Yeah.
but she had the same feelings that my grandparents had.
Sure.
And she was determined there'd be a homeland. So she came to Detroit, and she stayed with my grandparents, who were probably the only people who had room for her anyway. And they started things here. And so that was when Hadassah started here
Yeah.
in Detroit,
In Detroit, we're talking about probably the 19-teens or something like that.
a long time ago.
Something like
Right.
that. So this is your mother's side of the family.
Right,
Now let's talk a little bit about your father's side of the family and your father.
yeah.
So they both of them come down to Detroit. They meet in Detroit. Do you know how they met your parents? Is there
I have no idea. Oh, well, they met at church setting. I mean, they were on the board. One was on the board. The other one was the president. I mean, they were.
what background did your father come from? Like as far as Zionism, and as far as was there a family business? Was there?
Oh, the Davidsons had a big department store in Hillman, Michigan, right? And the reason they came here was as all his stores were made of wood.
Right.
This great big store, which we have pictures of, burned to the ground. So they decided to move where there were more Jewish people. I mean, it's the same thing.
And
All their
other
friends,
buildings.
the kids are all, there are
didn't
no
lose
Jewish people
Right.
in Hillman, Michigan.
Right.
And there were no Jewish people in all of those places. My other grandparents were.
So basically, both sides of your family are quite well off at the time of the century.
Yeah, they were.
They're quite well off, quite comfortable. Your mother and father are first generation, both of them. I'm sure they speak Yiddish. Kind of.
Yeah, they all spoke Yiddish.
Yeah.
But never a word to us.
No.
No.
You know, because
No,
they will
not a
want
word.
you to understand.
I asked my grandmother one day, and it wasn't Yiddish she was talking about, but I said, sounds like. And she said, and then she said, those horrible people, you'll never hear a word of that from me ever, ever. So, and I never heard Russian.
Your parents get married when? Roughly?
In the 20s, I guess. Yeah.
And do they carry the same sentiments that their parents carry about Zionism and about...
They both had, well, I didn't know that if the Davidsons were that active or that dedicated,
family was.
but they certainly felt the same way. Yeah. But and Grandpa Davidson was active at Shar Tzedek, so.
Shar Tzedek was down, where was it downtown?
It was downtown, yeah.
Where?
I have no
You don't
idea.
remember?
I don't
Okay.
remember.
What were you going to say?
Winder and brush
Okay.
at
thank
that
you.
point.
What were you going to say?
I was going to ask, when did your grandparents first go to Palestine? When did they first visit?
I really don't know.
But it was probably in the
I
20s.
mean, I know that, you know, my grandfather, when things were, there was Palestine and they knew it was beginning to be Palestine the way it was, and Jews were coming there. This was before it was a state.
Right.
My grandfather went with Mr. Simons to Israel. And I don't think Simons bought that. My grandfather bought this land for where Hadassah Hospital eventually, yeah.
Hospital. It's
They
the
gave
hospital,
them-
and there's a university there. I mean,
Yeah.
It's
Oh, no,
one-
the hospital.
The hospital.
Yeah.
Hadassah, Mount Scopus.
Yeah, Mount Scopus.
Right, Mount Scopus.
Yeah.
My parents live in French Hill, which is
Yeah.
right
They
next
bought
to it.
this land, and it was years and years later that
That they
that all.
So if Hebrew I don't know about the hospital. Hebrew University, the cornerstone was laid in 1925.
Yeah, there was some marker somewhere.
Yeah.
Someone in the family saw a marker sometime.
So then after they purchased the land in Mount Scopus, they donated it to Hadassah?
Yeah, but years later.
Like right before the establishment of the state?
Right. I think,
Something like that.
yeah, no, my grandfather wanted some land in Israel, you know, in what was Palestine.
And what kind of household do you and your brother grow up in as far as philanthropy, Zionism, religion? Where are you?
Well, we certainly knew we were Jewish, and we certainly knew that we needed a homeland, and we knew all of that.
Yeah.
And we certainly heard a lot about Hadassah, because first they weren't just getting going, but then they got going. And that, you know, it really grew hugely. So we knew all about that, and that was, my mother was very active. She was on the national board and this and that.
Who fed the household as far as Zionism? Was it more from your father, more from your mother, from your grandparents on your mother's side?
It wasn't, they all were like that.
Uh-huh.
I mean, my grandmother felt the same way my grandfather did. And I don't know when she went to Israel, but she got there.
What was the first time you were in Israel?
I don't remember, but I've been there a lot of times.
As well.
Right.
You don't remember the first memory?
Well, my first memory of it was I was always telling Bud, my husband, that I want to go to Israel, but never got there. We did other traveling and this and that. So one day Bud came in and said, guess what? You're going to Israel. I don't want to hear about it anymore. We're going. And he had joined some group that was going, very nice. So the next thing, we went to Israel. And nothing to do with Hadassah, nothing to do with anything,
Sure.
just to travel.
Private.
And it was very interesting because it was lovely people. We had a very good time. But we were the only people on this bus that did not have a single relative. Nobody we knew or anything in Israel. Okay. Everybody else had relatives.
Uh-huh.
So they were very nice. They used, the relatives would come and meet every...
Do you remember roughly what year this is? Roughly?
No, I
50s,
don't.
60s?
No, I don't.
No.
I really don't.
Okay. Do you remember your first impression about what you saw and the difference?
Well, it was very different. I mean, they had the the places where you stayed, which were
like hostels?
No.
Kibbutzes?
Kibbutzes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, they had big. That was big. So we always stayed at kibbutzes where they had for visitors and stuff like that. It was a very different land then, of course.
Of course. You and your brother eventually, especially also your brother, end up doing a lot of philanthropy work for Israel. Could you tell us a little bit about your brother being involved, how he got involved?
Well, he was born that way, so.
I understand. Well, that I understand.
Yeah.
That's where I'm.
Yeah, no. And he felt the same way. I mean, he loved Israel, and he wanted to do whatever he could do, and he could do a lot.
Yes.
And he did.
So you told me that your mother and your mother-in-law used to travel together to Israel.
No.
Didn't they take I thought
Not at all. Not at all. You're talking about something else, which is when my son was bar mitzvah, that was my mother's idea, that she would take him to Israel. And she took along my mother-in-law. So Ralph went with his two grandmas to Israel when he was 13. And then when Matthew came along, my mother again was going to go to Israel, and she took her two sisters instead with Matthew. So both my sons had trips to Israel when they were 13.
They were 13.
Yeah, which was great for them.
Another thing I want to ask you about Detroit, when you were growing up, I know this doesn't have a lot to do with philanthropy, but since we're talking, did you deal in any way, shape, or form in high school or in your neighborhood with anti-Semitism? There was a lot of things.
Oh yeah, I was oddly not. I'm one. Practically every friend I have has said something, but I really just didn't have that. I went to a small private girls' school.
Okay, where'd you go to school?
Which there were 18 girls in the class or something.
Yeah.
And there was one girl that was Jewish. That was Eleanor Siegel, family had this big department store here. And I absolutely loved my classes. And I had like one episode of slight anti-Semitism.
Okay.
Well, one or two, but we had a club and we went to the church. We met at the church, and one of the churches, and I don't remember what we did, but anyway, we did something. And one girl said something once, and all the other girls were just about to kill her. They would make a remark that was wrong. So, I mean, I was very lucky, very lucky. I just didn't happened to run into that.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is because in the 30s, 40s here in Detroit.
Well, we had Father Coughlin, so I mean, what more could you have?
Exactly.
Right, exactly.
So, I mean.
No, I was well aware of anti-Semitism,
Sure.
but
you didn't
didn't
experience it.
happen
You didn't
that
experience it.
I just happened to have a wonderful group of girls that were in my classes, and they were really, I don't think they thought much about Jewish.
I see. Do you, just out of curiosity, so you can't remember exactly when you did travel first time to Israel, but it was after the state was established?
No, it wasn't.
It was before.
It was before. Yeah. Yeah. And it was just a regular, kind of trip that everyone took there, and you always went to the
And this is when the British
same places and everything.
The British were in control then.
The British were.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And you felt that. You knew it.
Your friend that I just talked to, Anne Newman,
Yeah.
has very big resentment towards the British till this day, actually.
Well, I think they were horrible.
Well,
I mean, I don't think they could have been a lot nicer. I mean,
But that's why I wanted to ask you about you.
but I wasn't aware of.
No, I understand.
I heard all this, but I can't say, and I really knew about it.
And you were mentioning earlier about your grandparents from your mother's side.
Mm-hmm.
That you were very connected to them.
Yes. Well, very connected with them. But our whole family was very connected.
Both
My
sides.
mother and her sisters and brothers would rather be with each other than anyone, and which they were, although they were all very active elsewhere too, but they loved to be together. Mm-hmm. And I was raised with my brother and four other boys. We had my mother and aunts always had other houses.
Okay.
They had their own houses, and then they bought this house on the lake in Port Huron. Mm-hmm. And the day that school was out here, when I was in the early grades, the cars got packed the day after the school was closed, and we went right up to the lake and stayed there all summer and didn't come back till school again.
Yeah.
So I was raised with 5 boys, and my
You're the
job
oldest.
My job was taking care of the boys and driving the boys. I drove when I was 14, so I was very busy. And there are a lot of nice, very nice
Memories from yeah.
very nice guys, wonderful.
How would you summarize for me the activities of your grandparents?
They were both incredibly active. My grandmother, first of all, they were traveling, I don't know, early. My grandmother came from an odd situation in Russia where her parents, there was some deaths in the family, so she was raised with one cousin who was like a brother. And when she came here with my grandfather, he went to Argentina. So she had her sort of brother in Argentina. So my grandmother, as soon as her kids were big enough and gone, this and that, was heading down to Argentina from time to time. And she also liked to travel anyway. I mean, she loved to go on trains. My grandparents at some point didn't get along too well, but it didn't bother them. I mean, they just were both, well, they both were such strong personalities and they both did different things, but they both went their own ways. But, I mean, they were very nice with each other, but they just had different lives.
Yeah.
And my grandmother, I know she was so far ahead of herself. She was into vegan, I mean, stuff like that, vegetables. She was growing vegetables. And she was always telling her daughters to stop eating junk food and eat vegetables. And she found a friend. She got to know Dr. Kellogg, who was the guy who ran the Battle Creek Sanitarium, which was all about vegetable, and it was all about eating too much meats and all the whole thing. And she used to take me there. I was at the Battle Creek Sanitarium with her. If she went for a weekend, she'd take me. And I remember the first time I went there, she said, when we have dinner, you can order anything. So I thought that was odd because I know if I ordered meat or something, she's kosher. So, and I was kosher too. So, and then I ordered what she said. So I remember I ordered a lamb chops. And she didn't flinch. So when the lamb chops came, they didn't look quite like lamb chops. Vegetarian lamb chops. I mean, it was really amazing. And my grandmother loved this place in Battle Creek. She went there. And they talked about vegetables and this and that and all this health thing. And then they, at the end of the dinner, all these people got up and went to the gym and walked. Mm-hmm. That was his thing. Dr. Kellogg. Yeah. This Dr. Kellogg did not get along with his brother, I guess, but the brother is the one who was the serial king.
Right.
He was, but this guy was
nutritionist
running this institution for a long time. Yeah. It's written up. There was a guy wrote a book.
It's definitely written up.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
right.
There's actually a movie about it.
About
Pardon?
the sanitarium?
There's a movie about the sanitarium, a comedy that came out a few years ago.
Yeah, and somebody, something, wrote a book. T. Burrow or something, wrote a book about him.
Carrie, is there anything?
What else do you want us to know to make sure, as Josh said, the purpose of the tapes, so Josh has been traveling around the world.
Well, the States and Israel.
The States and Israel.
That's a good thing.
Interviewing people who have memories and things to add to the archives. So in the National Library of Israel, there will be these tapes for people to be able to access to understand how people from around the world, even those who didn't pick up and move to Israel or make Aliyah or fight in the war, were a part of how Israel was established. That without the philanthropic community,
it wouldn't have happened.
Mm-hmm.
That the level of support without people like your grandparents and your parents saying, we understand that there needs to be a Jewish homeland.
And your brother.
Of course, and the piece like Hadassah.
But see, it all came right in the family. I mean,
well,
that's
why we wanted to capture it, because
understand.
Yes.
So people will know who Bill Davidson was, but people don't know where it came from.
Right.
So that's why we're having this conversation.
Right.
So
he was like born into this.
But I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And somebody else in Israel who knows of Bill Davidson but doesn't understand where this influence came from. Now they can understand if it's.
Well, it was from the grandparents.
I understand.
Because they were Zionists. And then certainly my mother Hadassah was her big.
Was your father also heavily involved, or he was a little bit less?
My father never had a chance to be my father was killed in an automobile accident when I was 20. So, and he worked very hard. He had a hard business, as wholesale grocery is, nothing to sneeze at. It's terribly hard. And so he was going to play golf. One of the first times he got away enough to play golf with my uncle. And they were both killed.
His brother? Or
His
his brother-in-law?
No, his brother-in-law. So my mother and her sister were widows
Right up.
and very young in all one day. And there were 4 children there. It was really bad for us. And my brother and I both, I was up in Michigan, and my brother was at Michigan. And we both decided to stay home 1 year, and at least, and be with my mom. So, I mean, my college career was, I'm the only, I was ahead of my time. I went to 3 colleges in 4 years. But that was because I went to Wayne second, that year, and then I didn't want to go back to Michigan for the simple reason that I would be older than all the boys. And so my mother understood. She said, "Where do you want to go?" And I couldn't, all I could think of was New York. That's all I could think of. So I said, "I want to go to Columbia." So that's where I ended up.
You went to Columbia? And
Yeah.
would you study at Columbia?
Business.
Business? Wow.
I was a liberal arts, but
Where's that going to get you?
well, because when the fathers were killed and the sons were all in the war, I was the only one left here. So they thought I should have a little idea of business.
Was Bill in the war?
Bill was in the Navy.
He was in
Oh,
the
and
Navy?
Howie was in the war. He was in a Navy something or other. I don't know the name of that ships, but they were all in the war.
They were all in the war.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So,
I had forgotten you had gone to Columbia. I know your stories about high school and about Michigan, but I knew you have a love for New York, but it's wonderful to hear. I didn't realize that you studied business there. I know you. I always think of you as going to New York. Isn't that what you like to do every year on your birthday?
well, we go on, yeah, but then I just, my aunt lived in New Jersey, and I used to go there all the time.
Where
and
in New Jersey?
Um,
Hoboken?
Say it again.
Hoboken.
No,
No.
I forget where Rutgers is.
So you studied business?
Yeah.
You did an MBA there, or would you do there
I got 2 degrees. I don't know how I did it.
in what? In
I'm
business?
terrible in business.
Business and
Pardon?
you got 2 degrees, one in business. And
Yeah.
Both in business, like a
Yeah, right.
Gotcha. And how? Okay, so you lived in New York for what, 5-6 years?
I was there for 4 years,
4 years.
and every day I pinched myself. I'm still here. I love it. It was wonderful. It was very different times. I mean, it was wartime.
Sure.
And we had, a lot of fun. I mean, we went, I lived in, they didn't have place for me. I was one of the first business persons to turn up, so I lived with the Juilliard students.
Okay.
It was like, I thought I was in heaven.
Yeah.
I mean, this girl's playing harp, this girl's got a gorgeous voice. It was wonderful. And we used to go to theater. Every night we did something.
What about? So you're in New York during the war.
Right.
After the war, also.
Yeah, no.
There's a lot of. I'm sure. I don't know if you knew about it or anything, but I'll ask you. There was a lot of activity going on in New York about sending weapons and food and blankets to Palestine. Were you involved in any?
Nothing.
Okay.
Not one thing.
Just covering.
No.
Okay.
First of all, if you came back to Detroit, you wouldn't even know for a long time that the Jews were in trouble.
Right. But in New York, you knew.
Well, don't forget, newspapers didn't travel.
Right.
The New York Times was never seen here.
Right. Right.
And I used to come back and say, I'm reading the Times, and the people I knew said,
What are you talking about?
we didn't read that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It wasn't in our papers at all. I mean, it was very slow to come. But, I mean, we didn't have the same kind of papers and ways of getting these news out. But you certainly knew it was at war in New York.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are there other things you want to make sure that stay on film? Because I want to be mindful of your time. I know you have other things to do. You are not, you always are doing something. Is there anything else you want to make sure is on the film, talking about your grandparents or your parents or Bill, or any of your involvement in Israel at the beginning? And
Well, the thing was that both sides of my family, because the Davidsons too, but nothing like the Wetzmans,
Right.
we were very aware of Israel, of Palestine. And we were very aware of what was going on. And we were also very aware of how incredibly wonderful the Israelis were at the time, with how, with having the way they worked with everything, the way they cleared fields. I mean, people don't really know when you go to Israel today, it's green and gorgeous and everything. It was a rock. They had these horrible, I mean, they had, the land was full of all swamps.
Sure.
And everyone got malaria. I mean, there were all these things. This was not what the Israelis first got, was nothing like this marvelous piece of land they have. So, I mean, it was really awful. And we saw it too.
Yeah.
I mean, they were just awful looking fields, big boulders everywhere. I mean, it was not pretty. Mm-hmm. It was not as pretty. So we knew, but that was the land that had to be. And that's how we were raised. And we heard it.
Over and over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when's the last time you were in Israel?
About 2 years ago or so, yeah. And, my brother, I think, was the one who started fixing up the wall there. Mm-hmm. And that was such a wonderful project.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
And the Israel and the Israelis have a tremendous reverence for the past and for history and for what went on in history, sure. Which is not necessarily the way we live here, for sure. And that was a marvelous thing for us to have, all of us. And we always knew, there was this going back and forth with the Israel and knowing that they needed this, needed that, needed so much, which they did. And that we were going to get it for them if we could.
Dorothy, if there's anything else that you want to say, if there's anything that you feel that you forgot or...
No, I think, I consider myself very lucky to have had the parents, grandparents, and family that I had, because I think they were ahead of their times in a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And the one thing, they were very giving. They really were. They were, in their way, caretakers. I mean, they did a lot of caretaking within the families, you know, this cousin, that cousin, anybody who was a member of the family. You had to take care of because that was your family. And we were raised like that. Mm-hmm. And I'm very grateful for that because we don't find it exactly everywhere. And I never felt that my family, I mean, I never thought about money or anything like that, ever. When I was a child and even growing up and even in being in New York. Because, I mean, I had enough to live and that was all I ever cared about. And, but I was raised to think about, you know, if other people need something, you better try to see they get it. So there was a lot of that in my family.
There's also something that I remember hearing about your brother. There's a sentence in Hebrew, and it says matan beseter. It means most people who give charity, they want their name on a building. They want their name on a plaque. They want a name. But it was I understood a lot from your brother that he gave a lot where he didn't want his name.
That's right.
Seen.
Right.
He didn't want his name shown.
No.
And in Judaism, I can't remember where it is in the Bible, but they talk about that somebody who does that is elevated, spiritually elevated. And
no, he was like that. He did not want, and he tried very hard to be he was a very private person, actually. Yeah. And that was not, and he was very, he thought very clearly for what he needed to think, and he didn't budge. He knew what he thought about most things. And a lot of it was charity and a lot of it was his business, but he knew. And I never, he wasn't a person that ever wanted anything. You'd think, what would Bill like? You could never think, he didn't want anything.
Well, I'll tell you a funny story, and this is the only time I ever met your brother. I must have been about 4 or 5 years old. My brother and Ethan were in the same class in Hillel.
Oh.
Okay? And I went with my father to pick my brother up from...
Hillel, sure.
No, from Bill's house.
Oh, Bill's house.
They were playing.
Yeah.
And I remember, of course, walking into this very big house with my father.
Yeah.
And the housekeeper was there. And she got Bill out of bed to come say hello to us, and he came out in his robe.
That would be Bill.
He came in his robe, and I remember. Now, I didn't remember this as a child. I mean, I remembered it, but my father reminded me of it. I'd say, I think I was in the army in Israel, and I think it has to do with the Pistons or something. And then my father said to me, "You met Bill with me," and I was like, and then I remembered, and he explained to me the house, and then this guy with a robe, and chit-chatting with they knew each other, but they were very different ages, of course.
Oh, yeah.
But that's the memory that I have of this very kind of, just very casual.
Yeah.
Kind of, but that's the memory that I have of your brother. Like I said, I was maybe 5. I can't really remember.
Yeah.
I can't remember if it was before he left for Israel or before or after. But this is a very important phrase in Hebrew, which I told you, matan baseter. Matan is to give, and seter is to be discreet. And You know, I think this is like I said, it's an elevation, because you're doing something you don't want to be acknowledged. You want to be helpful. You know?
He was so much that way. I mean, one of my friends worked at Guardian, and she said, when Bill wants to see they fixed him up a nice office, and then she said, when Bill wants to see anybody, he gets up and walks down to their office to see them.
Yeah.
He never called in anyone to come in.
Yeah, to his office. Yeah.
That would be, no, he wouldn't be like that.
Yeah.
He's not like that. Yeah.
Okay, Dorothy, are we, yeah?
Thank you.
Thank you very...
I know Sundays, it's a nice day to do other things. And for you to sit home with us, I really appreciate it.
Oh.
I always appreciate any time I get to spend with you, I appreciate.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Well, I appreciate that you're doing this.
Thank you.
And
we've been doing this for 10 years.
Well, it makes me feel very good that my grandparents and my parents and my brother are going to be on tape or whatever it's going to be on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because
absolutely.
they had a lot to say.
Sure. Well, that's why we're channeling it through you.
Yeah, right.
Okay, I'm going to just get you a release. We need to have her sign a release.